2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Josh and Jason Monday Christian and Conspiracy Podcast. I am your host, Josh Monday. If you don't know me, I'm a Christian rapper, devoted husband, father, and Army veteran. I'd like to introduce you my co-host. He's a Christian, devoted husband, and father. What's up, Jason?
Good afternoon, everybody. What's up, Gary? How's everything going?
So happy to be with you guys, and always busy, but just love getting on the show and talking about whatever you guys want to talk about, or particularly what your audience wants to talk about.
So guys, this is our perfect guest, Christian and Conspiracy. Gary goes over so much stuff. He's awesome. Here's his book, guys. You guys need to definitely check it out. The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Definitely check it out, guys. It is so awesome, man. I just started reading it. Out of the time that I have, which I don't have any, I'm trying to work it out as much as I can and get into it and dig deep. So, Gary Wayne, thank you so much for coming on, brother. We really appreciate you, brother.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, all right, guys. So let me go over the Bible verses that I wanted to go over today. It's going to be Revelations 20 verses 1 through 6. It says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years and cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosened a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment has given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon his forehead or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This was the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. And such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." Guys, such a powerful verses right there, man. It's very interesting. And I would like to talk to Gary today about because we talked about the beginning, like Genesis. We talked about Genesis 6 on the last show. Now I would like to talk about, the now, and also, the prophecies of the end times, if that's okay with you, Gary.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And I love the verse that you quoted, because, for a lot of people who sort of get things out of order with biblical chronology in terms of prophecy, they have to ignore chapter 20. And a lot of people who have a lot of different views where they don't include all of the passages have to ignore the millennium. Period, because it just doesn't sync with what's being talked about. And it's a beautiful recap of what Revelation is really all about. It's a summary and the consequence thereof, including that resurrection that is another resurrection in the sequences of resurrections that will take place in the last 7 years. This is yet another one that has to happen just before the millennium, because it's going to encompass all the people who refuse to not just take the mark, but also not to worship Satan, and also not to worship Antichrist, who were killed, separate from the ones who may survive into the millennium, but a different resurrection than the first fruits. And when Jesus comes, those who died with Christ as a believer, this is a separate one that you have to understand. There's several resurrections if you're going to understand chronology perfectly. And this sort of eliminates a lot of theories if you keep this one in your back pocket.
Awesome. That's a great interpretation of those verses. So I wanted to ask you, where do you feel we are in the end times prophecy? Like, where do you feel we're at, Gary?
Again, very good question, and very good question in the times that we're in, where we see a lot of end time like things that might indicate that we're going into the end times. The thing we have to be careful of, and I always like to sort of throw this out as a qualifier, is that so many people have predicted dates and predicted events and all sorts of things that they get ahead of themselves on the chronology that I was referring to earlier. So we want to be careful of that. So I sort of preface everything, if we are in the fig tree generation, what would that look like? And what is the fig tree generation? And the fig tree generation could be a generation of 40 years, as is talked about during the time of the conquest or the Exodus, I'm sorry. It could be 70 years, as the Psalms talks about, or it could be 120 years that Genesis 6:3 talks about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the generation doesn't have to go that full length. So the fig tree generation is sort of a prophetic allegory for the southern kingdom of Judah.
Okay.
Whereas the northern kingdom that's still lost and is yet to be awakened, but will in the last 7 years, were the vine. And so Jesus, before, and not too long before he presents the signs that the disciples ask for, he kills a fig tree in Jerusalem, and it's going to bear no fruit. And that's just before he prophesizes the overturning of the temple in Jerusalem and what is going to, shortly transpire after his crucifixion. And so this fig tree is the allegory we want to keep in line when he's talking about the fig tree generation, and when you see it coming to bloom, and you need to understand the season. So it's that generation when not only the southern kingdom, visible Judah, as opposed to lost Israel, is in the covenant land. Now, you get a couple of dates that are important while they're in the covenant land: 1947, when they declared their independence, 1948, when they won their independence. But one of the critical things about end time prophecies, it centers around possessing Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so that's essential in most of those end time prophecies. So I think if you have a countdown, if we are in the fig tree generation, you start counting down from that. So that starts to say, okay, if it's 40 years, then we would be already in it, but we're not seeing enough chronological events happening. If it is 70 years, that means we're into the last 7 years, either starting or completing by, say, 2037 or to 2044. And
interesting.
If it's 120 years, well, there's more time still and things to happen.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that you have an sort of arching sign that is provided by Jesus at the beginning of the signs. And you get the two overarching other prophecies for the fig tree generation, with the fig tree generation being one, and then followed immediately by the days of Lot, or the lifetime of Lot and Noah. So, and Luke is where Lot comes into play, where Luke mentions both. And so we have the beginning of sorrows, when he lays out the birth pangs, which are earthquakes, they are wars and rumors of war, they are pandemics, and they are famine. And also add into what Luke is talking about in chapter 21, if my memory serves me correctly, about the surging seas. So we need to have all of those sort of working in
unison,
conjunction with each other, and getting stronger as you get to the birth of the new age of Jesus reigning as the millennium, as opposed to the new age of the polytheists and new age movement. But for the millennium, where he's going to rule. And this is part of what we need to see happening more together and in more significant ways as we progress on. So we're starting to see pandemics. I mean, COVID is one of those more significant events that's not seemingly quite going away, and we could see other pandemics. And certainly we're starting to see nations like, particularly with the leadership that's in the West, to put it nicely today, you see Russia and China, who are gearing up to secure a larger place for themselves in the new world order that I like to call the Nephilim world order, of the 10 kings that Babylon is going to sponsor. So we haven't seen Babylon rise yet, but we've seen the world religion starting to surface. Whatever people think that is, I think it's a universal mystical languages that sort of recreates monotheism within. And you have a lot of work to get that done. But we do see some work with the World Council of Churches, the covenant of Abraham that's going to open up next year. That is a covenant between Roman Catholic Christians and Islam, Sunni only, not Shia or Sufi, and with some sects of Judaism. And they're calling that like the World Religion Center, right? So it's sort of that starting place. So that hasn't come together yet.
Well, it
so
feels
I
like
think,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it feels like it's going, I want to say like what I've been studying, it goes in with what you're saying, but I feel like when the church of Pergamum, as in chapter 12 of Revelation, and the angel of the church writes to Pergamus, and he talks about how I know that works. I know where thou dwellest, even where the Satan's seat is, and thou holdest fast my name. And it says, and has not denied my faith, even those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you where Satan dwelleth. Well, I feel like how where Pergamus was the heart of the Babylonian worship, because when Babylon was conquered, that's where all their priests and that's where all their followers went to worship their gods in Pergamum. And then when you have the time, kind of like when Julius Caesar goes and conquers them, he finds out, hey, I like this kind of religion. I like how they adopted it, and he brings it back to Rome. So therefore, you could probably see where Babylon, maybe Babylon wouldn't be a place, but where its worship went to, it followed into Pergamum, then it went to Rome, and then Rome dispersed it out throughout the world. And now you still have that idol worship. See, we look at Gentiles look at prophecy, we think of action and fulfillment, like something has to be done to fulfill something. But Jews think of it as in pattern. So when things are patterned, they know that it's prophesied right. So I feel like Abraham left. He left the Chaldeans, which was Babylonian idol worship. He left there. Then the devil found out how to mimic that and push it out there. So now you have the heart. It goes into the heart of Israel. Now you have that Balaam worship that's stuck there, and that's why Judah didn't accept it all the way, but the northern kingdoms, they went rampant with it. They stayed into it. They didn't care. So now that's what I feel like that the end times are about. We're following that idol worship again, and we're going back to the ways of idol worship, which is even in Catholicism. When you see Roman Catholic, he brought up too, like when you bring them all together, that's like saying when Constantine says, here's the cross, all religion is basically okay, even this idol worship, even your pagan worship, but as long as Christianity, we can't beat them, so we're gonna join them. So it's kind of, they're gonna do the same thing like back then, because that's when a lot of stuff started back then, when a lot of things religiously was going wrong, inquisitions, everything, they were murdering Christians left and right. But I think I feel like the pattern's gonna follow that.
right.
Okay.
That Baal worship, whatever that Balaam, that whatever got taught to them is going to be a stumbling block for us Christians as well.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. And I also want to throw in there, and I'm going to come back to it. We're told it's a mystery religion. So that's the Greek word mysterion, and it's a mystery religion, and it's initiation. And so we need to keep that in mind. And all the allegories, whether, that has to do with adultery and prostitution, are all allegories defined in the Old Testament to define worshiping polytheism. So
like spiritual fornication, right? Like you're spiritually fornicating with another God.
Every word used to describe Babylon goes back to that ancient religion, and Babylon is rooted in the Greek and Hebrew word Babel. So it's the religion of Babel that Nimrod imposed, who was an archetypical figure for the end time as an antichrist with that universal religion. So that's kind of part of it. And if you look at prophecy in the beast empires in account 7 in Revelation 17, and 4 going forward in the Babylon, Metallic, and beast empires, you have 7 empires that were very important in terms of what happened to Israel. So you have to have that 10th empire in the end time. And what I mean by that is that, and that's why Babylon's going to sponsor the 10 kings, because it's part of that. In all of the beast empires, you have that polytheist religion as part of the organizational structure to the beast empire. So in Egypt, that's the first beast. That's where Israel becomes a nation. The second empire is Assyria, which is based out of Babel and Babylon and Nimrod as descendants, but they actually expropriate the northern kingdom and send them into exile and into slavery, and they won't be seen until the end time. And then along comes Babylon, and they take Judah, the southern kingdom, into exile. And then Persia makes it available to them to build a new temple and move back. Greece moves in, and that's where it starts to move into this Pergamum and seat of Satan type of historical aspect, that the Nazis were also involved in putting in place. And then you have and you also have an abomination like happening in the Greek Empire too. But it's not the real abomination, but there is an abomination that is set up in the second temple. And then you have the Roman Empire, who is going to not only oversee the crucifixion of Jesus, but also is going to disperse Judah to the four winds again, only they're not lost, they're still a visible people. And so when we look at Babylon then, and we look at it as what is Babylon and what should we be looking for, it's more than just one thing. And that's where a lot of people get sort of confused. So we know it is a place because it's called a city 9 times in Revelation 14, 17, and 18. So we know it's a city. We know it is a religion based on what we just talked about in terms of being a polytheist, and all of the abominations, all of the allegories are religious sort of orientated. And we know she sits on many waters, as Revelation 17 talks about. So we know it's a universal religion. And we also know that Babylon is this worldwide commercial center because she grows rich, and all the merchants in Revelation 18, as were described, grow rich from working with this new commercial capital center in the world. So I think actually Babylon is probably going to take a tribute or a tax on every electronic transaction that happens going forward. She's going to be that powerful. And Babylon is also the force that sponsors the 10 kings, that brings them together, that Antichrist is going to negotiate. So we need to understand Babylon as all of that, and understand it as a daughter of Babylon, as the allegories are coming from the Old Testament, and understand it as the beast religion, because it's part of that organizational structure.
Would you say it was mother?
And is one part of the, just a second, I'm just going to wind this up. And it's one part of the meanings of the beast empires and system, because you have to understand all the things that it talks about with the beast empire. So between Babylon and the beast empire, you have to look at all of the references and prophecy to understand all of its aspects, to get a firm grip on what's being talked about.
Interesting. So,
I'm sorry, there's a question.
Yeah, as I said, would you say that the basis of all their idol worship is a lot of it's based on a mother son, like a mother and a how do you say a resurrected son, basically, kind of like just mimicking, how
a counterfeit religion.
Yes,
with a counterfeit Antichrist. That we're going to see a counterfeit Armageddon. We're going to see counterfeit rapture. We're going to see counterfeit everything, because they have to do that to deceive people.
Yeah,
I want to ask, because this is going to be my next question, anyways. So you're talking about the counterfeit rapture. What do you feel is going to be the strong delusion from 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 11? Everyone talks about it being like a alien invasion, Project Bluebeam. What is your feeling on that?
It's everything. It's not just one thing. I think that's part of that. But the delusion that overcomes the last generation, that creates that godless generation that's described in Timothy. And it's not a nice generation. This is a deception that is going to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. And it is. So it's got to include who Antichrist is and how Antichrist makes himself credible as the Messiah. So it's all of that. And understand, when we're talking about counterfeits, I don't know whether I got it in there, but counterfeit Armageddon. There has to be a counterfeit Armageddon to fully counterfeit the prophecies before Jesus gets here.
Yeah. Okay. So, and you said rumors of wars, as you guys see, man, you guys see China ramping up. You see Australia and China looking, Taiwan, USA is looking like they want to get involved. Russia's back in China. A lot of rumors of war right now going on, guys. A lot. And there's a lot of hot zones that you guys don't even know about that when I was in the military, they showed me a big diagram of all these red spots that were actually at war and nobody in the civilian world even knows about. Yeah. So
that's crazy.
it's interesting. It's very interesting stuff. So,
well, as they're promising an age of peace and the wonderfulness of globalism, the descendants of Goebbels' news network have to use propaganda and not report things that are detrimental to bringing about global government and the universal religion. And so they're just going to dumb those things down. And if we look at what's going on with weather patterns today, a lot of people ask me, well, what do you think about that and global warming? I'm going, there's issues that are going on perhaps with the weather. I mean, I'm not buying the snow caps melting because they've been melting since the last ice age and they'll continue no matter what. So,
yeah.
But if there are weather patterns changing, then whatever they're going to tell us it is a lie. You have to understand that. They're not going to tell what the truth is, what's going on, just as they don't want to flag the birth pangs.
Yeah.
Right. So the fake news is going to lie because that's what they do. And even when they can't hide from how bad they are, in terms of getting caught at lying, they continue. And half the population or more still believes them because they want to believe that lie. And that's part of that deception that's coming. That's part of the brainwashing that has taken place, that they know they're lying. But it is so awful to think that they could be wrong or believe the wrong thing, and no way could they ever believe truth.
Yes.
That they'll deny it. And that's part of that big delusion that we see, I think, ramping up in the birth pangs.
Amen to that. That's for sure.
I like
and
that.
Then,
the birth pains. That's
what I was gonna also ask, like, what role do you think the fallen angels, the Nephilim, will have in the end times? I know Jesus said that in Matthew 24 verses 37 through 39, he said, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. And now until the flood came and took them away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." So some, like, Chuck Missler, a couple other people that we listened to were thinking that maybe the Nephilim would come back, or giants would come back. Is that something that you maybe think, Gary?
It's definitely a possibility. We can't rule it out because you have giants. And the days of Noah, I think, are words that are chosen by Jesus that is very, very specific, even though the New Testament comes out of Greek. In the Old Testament, it's translated out of Hebrew. If you look at where it actually says the days of Noah, okay, you're going to start in Genesis 9:29, and you're going to have words that, and the days of Noah were 600 years before the flood, 350 years after the flood, which is the significance of the Sodom and Gomorrah aspect and the giants after the flood. So it's kind of like that. That's kind of a bridging of one apocalypse to apocalypse of fire for the end time as well. You also get that as a reference, let's say, in 2 Peter 2:4, where it's talking about the crimes of what happened before the flood combined with the crimes at Sodom and Gomorrah as in the days of Noah. So I think we need to understand both of it and understand Babel is the center of that religion where it breaks out in the days of Noah after the flood, and Enochian mysticism, as I think we might have talked about in the last show, was that universal mystical religion that was reestablished at Babel under Nimrod. So you have that days of Noah aspect that we have to understand, and that includes the concept of not only angels being with us in the last generation, walking with us just as they did and were being worshipped in that pantheon of gods, of the 7 major gods and all the lesser gods, all of the fallen angels, and they also procreated both before and after the flood. In terms of my position is leans heavily to second position, even though I'm open to perhaps they're surviving.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, giants show up after the flood, and that's the thing to remember. So we're either going to see giants show up in a way that would be as their descendants, and I make a good case for that with the royal bloodlines.
For sure.
That and they're going to be part of those people who are going to rule the earth with the 10 kings of the groups of nations and the empires of those 10 groups of nations. So that's why you see China, it's going to take more, and you're going to have Russia take more. And they're going to eventually have 10 large groups that each have a representative. Probably most of them will be bloodlines. We have to be open to the fact, though, that when we look at the passage in the metallic empires laid in Daniel chapter 2, where you have the 4 metallic empires, which are the same as the 4 beast empires in Daniel 7. You have in that end time empire, you have either descendants or a different race of people that are going to be mixing their blood with the human seed, as the King James Version talks about. So something's going on there. Either that is a mixing of spirit or a mixing of how you reproduce, and there's 2 different peoples going on. However you want to define that's going to take place, it could be as well that commingling that's being talked about is from a spiritual perspective, and that you have demons who are wandering the earth, and ones that will later be released from the abyss with the fallen angels are going to possess some of these kings of that last empire, or you're going to have like a clone body for an oiketerian, a dwelling place for the spirit, so that it can interact in the physical world. Because just as Jesus talked about these demon spirits who weren't locked into the abyss, and there's 2 groups of them, as with the angels, that they are like in dry places, and they thirsting to be in a body for rest and to interact. So for them to interact, you have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to have to possess a body or have a new oiketerion created for them. And so that's the word habitat. That's the dwelling place that the angels left in Jude 1:6. That's a dwelling place for the spirit. And so angels need a dwelling place for the spirit as well. Right.
Yeah.
So angels as well. So you could have that, or you could have a recreation of the giants, but we're going to see something like that as it transforms and becomes a little bit more, I think, obvious. And you have the angels who walked and governed with humans and governed over humans with their divine representatives. Right. So I think you're going to see angels that are not in the abyss, because only the impassioned and the worst of the ones went in. Who are going to probably take an oiketerion in a body. And we know angels can do that, because we've got angels in the Sodom story again, in the days of Noah, where 2 of them accompany the Lord to visit Abraham, and then those 2 will go on to Sodom to do the destruction. And they are men, as they're described, and they look like men. And initially they're not recognized as angels, but then they are, and they eat and they interact, they touch, and then they do the same thing. And actually people want to have sex with them in Sodom. So they're physically there. So expect the fallen angels to do that again as well. And then angels and demons, with the opening of the abyss in Revelation 9, will also enter in just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, certainly after the seals are opened, by a linear understanding of the seals, trumpets, and bowls, which, by the way, gives the birth pangs give you perfect allegorical, prophetic allegory and synergy and order in terms of the increasing 25%, 33%, and what would be 100% unless Jesus stepped in for the seal, trumpet, and wrath judgments. So you see that birth pang getting stronger as you go through with destruction. And so you have these giants that these demons that are going to be released, and angels released just before the midpoint. And of course, in Revelation 9, you have the counterfeit Armageddon. You have the 200 million man army. That is the same description of people in Joel 1 and 2 verses 3, which is the Armageddon war. And then you have another war that matches up, which is the Ezekiel war, 38 and 39, where you have Gog and Magog. And
Yes.
Magog is in the Bible, in the Table of Nations, but Gog isn't. And Magog and Gog in polytheism were the offspring giants of Iapetus before the flood. And so you wonder whether or not that's also part of what Daniel 2 was talking about, where not only are those nations, and nations descended through the Table of Nations as they intermarried with giants after the flood, there is also a possibility that these leaders are demons in some sort of body or been recreated, because Gog is defined both from the Greek and the Hebrew as also an allegory for an end time Antichrist figure, which you would need for a counterfeit Armageddon. And then you've got the war in heaven that goes on at Revelation 12 with 3.5 years left, that Revelation 12 gives you the timing on. So at the time of the abomination, or just shortly thereafter, there's the war in heaven, and the rest of the fallen angels are all sent down to the earth. So we're going to have that commingling completely of at least 33 million fallen angels, because whether or not the number is allegorical or not, it's a big number. Because you also have angels counted as uncountable, like, so a huge number. But in Daniel 8 and in Revelation, you get a number of 10,000 times 10,000 of angels. That's 100 million. So if a third have already rebelled, that's at least 33 million of them.
And it only takes one angel to wipe out 40,000 men in one night, or whatever it was.
So it was 180,000 men.
180,000,
and he slit the throat of every other man. So the other guys woke up. They were like, "What the?"
They have some kind of power. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
for sure. And then, as far as you were talking about angels, also like Hebrews 13:1, it says, don't forget to entertain strangers, for doing so you're unwittingly entertaining angels. So you never know when you're actually entertaining an angel here on earth. So that's
I like what Gary said about how maybe these leaders that are demonized. But what if you think about the stuff that they worship? The stuff that they worship are mostly a lot of idols in India. I'm pretty sure that in China, everywhere you go, even in Roman Catholicism, there's idols all over the place. So even when you're worshiping that, you're bringing on a demon behind that. That just says every idol has a demon behind it. So if you're worshiping a huge major religion in your country is ran by that demon, whatever's behind it. I feel like that's what I was, because I look at India or other countries that are in famine. They don't eat. They rather worship a cow than feed their family. You know what I mean? They take sacred things and don't understand that life is more sacred than that object that was invented. So you might want to.
Well, I still think the demons, although they're worshipped, and they're worshipped in the Old Testament as well, as devil gods, you have still the hierarchy in place. So you have the Psalms 82 with the Council of the Gods, who are overruling the 70 nations, and as they extend, the hierarchy just sort of branches out to sort of cover that. But demons answer to the devil. They answer to Diablos as opposed to Daemon, which is the demon as it comes out in Greek. They are ghosts and shades. And so they do the bidding of Satan. And one presumes the hierarchy of council of angels, they're low on the hierarchy above the elementals that we need to be aware of, that the Bible also talks about. But they will be part of, as Revelation talks about, I think 3 times with demons, when they're still worshiping these idols that you're talking about in Revelation 9, that goes back to a demon word in Greek. And then you also have the demons that are part of the haunt of Babylon. So you get that idolatry back in. And then the third time is when demons come out of the mouth of the false prophet and the Antichrist to gather everybody for Armageddon. So you see that interaction in perhaps possession, or maybe an invited possession where it will give them more power, but typically that would be done by a fallen angel or a god and an avatar concept in polytheism, because typically possession is not symbiotic, right? It's brutal. But if they're inviting that spirit in, that spirit may be suppressed.
Yeah.
And the spirit may be in more control, but it's not.
They probably have a deal. They probably have a deal set up like, hey, listen, like probably with the devil, because they're like you said, the Royal Masonic bloodlines, or they're higher up. Yep. They might have a deal where they're like, hey, if I would like to invite it in, but I have to have some control, and then it'll have some control as well. I would think there's a pact between them.
Well, and that may be while iron doesn't mix with clay. Because basically clay is part of the whole allegory and meanings of the Hebrew words for Adam, from red clay and being created from clay. And iron comes out of the metallic empires of the descendants of the Rephaim, and because they're all interconnected as they come down through history, and they're all beast empires. Just like Antichrist is going to be a beast, and you get this demon that comes out of his mouth. In Revelation 16.
I had a question. Where do you? It's probably gonna be tough for you to answer. Where do you think the Antichrist? What nation do you think it's going to rise out of? Some people say Rome. Some people say different things. What do you think? I know it's hard to tell, and it's hard to.
It really is, and I tend to bring in the Daniel 8 prophecy. And it isn't in contradiction with the 7 empires, as it would include Assyria and Egypt, to add on to the 5 that's talked about in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 with the beast and metallic empires, with the 6th being the end time, or the 7th being the end time empire, then the 8th being when Antichrist takes power. So 8 in total, which is another interesting number when you bring Satan into the pantheon of 7 gods of the wandering stars, and the 8th is Satan, who's going to be worshipped with Antichrist in the last 3.5 years. But you have in Daniel 8, you have a prophecy of Alexander, who's the Greek beast empire, and he's the first one in that count, and then it splits into 4.
The small horn of the big horn, isn't it? Isn't that the prophecy?
Yep.
Oh,
and it splits into 4 parts afterwards, just as the Greek Empire does. So that's 5. And then Rome is part of that empire, right? And then Rome takes power, that becomes 6. And then the end time Roman Empire becomes the 7th empire. But it works to add more information, not in contradiction with the beast empires or the metallic.
And how long before this stuff happens is this prophecy written, though?
Well, let me get to that in a second. So if you add in what is the meaning of this individual in the Greek Empire who rose to a level that was Antichrist-like. In fact, the Muslims actually looked at him as an Antichrist figure with a horn or 2 horns, right? And one could make an argument that it's going to be from the bloodlines descending out of that empire and in the Greek Empire. I still don't like to get that specific. I like to still say, well, it's probably within the Greek and the Roman Empire somewhere, which seems most likely with all of the allegories around Rome that is, and the empire that comes out of that empire. That seems most likely, but we don't want to become too legalistic about that, right? So just in case, because we don't want to lose our credibility, so we want to make sure we understand what the possibilities are. So how fast does this come around? I think was the question that was posed, and I think we're getting closer, but I think it's going to take the universal religion to come about first, and it's going to take catastrophes, and it's going to take the false prophets of Babylon who are going to predict apocalyptic doom through contrived catastrophes. And I think the birth pangs are contrived catastrophes caused to bring about the day of reckoning, because they want this battle with God to try and defeat God, or at least win a realm on their own, like Lucifer was after in Isaiah 14. So I think that we need to see Babylon come along first. We need these catastrophes, these false prophets, to bring Babylon along first, because if you look at Revelation 17 again, she rides the beast of empires, and she controls them. She reigns over them with reigns. I mean, part of the allegory etymology of the words. And so you have these 10 kings who are going to grow jealous of Babylon, and are going to hand their power over to Antichrist to destroy Babylon shortly after the midpoint of the last 7 years. So they're trying to get rid of her. And the only way that can happen is Babylon comes to power first and puts them in place. And they're not in place for a long period of time. And Antichrist is the one that's going to negotiate that covenant for the last 7 years in Daniel 9:27. And then Revelation, and then Revelation, and to put one other piece into perspective there, you have Revelation 2:8 and 9. I think it's 2:9 to be specific, where you have a tribulation for 10 days. And of course, the week of years and the timing between the midpoints and the 3.5 years, a time times and half a time, all the imagery of the count is a day is a year in these prophecies that work so well between Revelation and Daniel. And so if that's 10 days of tribulation, that's more than the last 7 years. So there's going to be significant tribulation then before the covenant that brings these 10 kings to power happens, which presupposes that Babylon would be the one that's causing that tribulation, just as it really gets bad by Babylon in the first 3.5 years.
When you were describing her, doesn't it kind of sound like America to you in a way, where you said her, like we got the Statue of Liberty. You were talking about them controlling the reins. It seems like America's kind of leading the way, but people are very jealous of America and want to take over. I don't know. I'm just kind of
I go back to the word city 9 times in Revelation. So Babylon is a city, and I would look at America as being very powerful. It would be running one of the 10 kings. Probably it's going to go through some issues before we get to that point. Which we're starting to see happen. You could have a split up of the U.S. You could have a war that hurts Israel significantly. United States significantly, but it's going to be one of the 10 kings that's going to see a number of groups. So even if the U.S. splits up, it's still going to come together as part of that empire. And it might be even shaping up these days as Australia right through to England, which would put sort of most of the English-speaking nations back together as part of the end time empire.
Wow. Interesting. And then also I got another question for you. What do you think the mark of the beast will be? We have so many rumors flying around, like, they think it's, I don't even want to say the word because we'll get kicked off of YouTube, but they think it's the JAB. They think it's a microchip, whatever. What do you think it would be, Gary?
It's still developing. So if you look at, and so we can kind of imagine what the end time product might look at, but you need to imagine it through the lens of what is taking shape through the universal religion, the sciences, and the political aspect that is all working sort of in separate lanes. So as you get universal religion, that is going to be coming together, and she's going to deceive all of the nations. She's going to put something in place that Antichrist inherits, right? So it's going to come through her. And the sorceries that Babylon deceives the nations is the word pharmakia, which is the root word for pharmakia, pharmacus and pharmakos. So there's 3 words that are used for sorcerers and sorceries in Revelation, all meaning the same thing. And that's a source word for pharmaceuticals and charms and spells, as the other meaning goes. And so as you see, vaccinations is part of the pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals is also creating all of these new chemical drugs that are addicting everybody, that goes to the black market, like opioids and things like that. So I think there's a lot of that's going on, but it's the medical side that we need to be aware of in conjunction with the pandemics and the delivery system for the cure. Right? And if you go to Davos, in 2017, they imagined the implant system that would have all of this AI connection and quantum mechanics and computing capability into different dimensions would be connected to a central core of intelligence, and for a lack of a technical word, this giant sort of computer we can't imagine of artificial intelligence, and that it would do things digitally, just as they're sending digital messages with the COVID mRNA viruses, that would just give you perfect health and cure all the diseases, and that people would demand that. So I think that's going to be part of it. It's also going to be connected into this new type of currency that we're starting to see on the market that's more than just credit. It's turning into like an AI driven type of cryptocurrency that's still developing and is going to be part of it. And it's going to be able to track everybody in Europe. So you have these lanes that are coming together that can be controlled by the religion and the Antichrist. When he comes, that they'll know where everybody is in the world and who has taken the mark and who hasn't it. So it's still developing into this nexus point that is being assembled. So what the end point is, I can't quite imagine what all the idiosyncrasies of the technology might be. But I'm looking at all of these arms that are going to be coming together to form what that chip is. And that ability to change the DNA is the key to the mark of the beast and the consequence for going to the lake of fire. Because the only sin that's not forgiven is a blasphemy or a sin against the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. Yep. Or taking the mark of the beast, right?
Yeah. And if you look at where do we get another analogy of who's going to the lake of fire? You're going to have the demons, you're going to have the fallen angels, and those who worship Antichrist and Satan in the last 3.5 years. They will all burn forever in the lake of fire. And what the fallen angels did was they violated the laws of creation in the physical world, something that they wouldn't have tried in the spiritual world because God would have zapped them completely. But there's free choice that they were permitted to do that in the physical world. And they're the ones that are going to the lake of fire. So I think for violations against the laws of creation and crimes against humanity, because and the reason why I add that in it, because the Nephilim were created to be terrors and enslave humankind all throughout our history. And when we're resurrected, we'll judge those fallen angels, as the New Testament tells us. And so I think we're going to judge them for the crimes that they committed against the descendants of Adam since the creation of Adam.
Very interesting. Super interesting. Okay. I wanted to ask you, because we have a lot of people that are Christian and conspiracy listening to the show. I want to kind of give you a few names, if this is okay. And let me know, like, how much weight does their research hold in your opinion, or is that okay?
Yeah, I could save you some time. I don't look at other people's research on this.
Okay. Well, I won't even ask you then. I
respect everybody who does research. But I can't talk expertly on their research. And I think whether or not I agree or I disagree with them, that's not really the point, because nobody's ever going to 100% agree with everybody.
Okay.
The point is that they're getting information out there for people to consider, but you can go through the names. I just thought I'd put that out that, and people ask me why. I'm so busy learning myself on my own. I haven't really needed to rely on other people's research.
Well, it's okay. I won't even ask you, because I don't even want to get into it. It's all good. If you it's okay. I got another question for you.
I do like a lot of the researchers out there, though, from what I've met and worked with, but not to be an expert on their work. So
that totally makes sense. What do you feel the abomination of desolation is?
Well, I think 2 Thessalonians 4 makes that quite clear.
Yeah, it's the temple.
Yeah, it's the crowning of the Antichrist in the temple at the midpoint. That signals that is the Antichrist. Yeah,
kind of like when they turned their backs to the temple and started worshiping the sun. That's an abomination. You're doing that stuff inside the temple. That's a big no-no.
Yeah. So if you take, and if you take the chronology that is being talked about in 2 Thessalonians 2, and overlay that on what Jesus lays down for a chronology, you'll see it matches up perfectly. And for people who might be still in the camp, and everybody's welcome to their own views, and it's okay to agree to disagree. if you look at how Jesus lays out his signs, it's in a chronological order, not a topical order. And you get that in that word then. And that's just not an English word that's substituted in that should mislead anybody. It goes back to the Greek word tot. That means at that time, thereafter, and it means that consistently all the way through. So he's telling you the order, and then he's giving you the midpoint with the abomination, and to read about Daniel to understand it. And so if you want to understand prophecy and you want to understand Revelation chronology, my advice is to place all prophecy around what Jesus said and not vice versa.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Jason, do you have any questions, bro?
No, I like listening.
I know.
It's good stuff. It's the questions you're asking are fine. It's just, I just like to let him go and talk about what he knows. And this is good stuff. It's all very good.
And that's why, if you to understand the birth pangs, and a lot of people make a great, I think, point that they're kind of all the same. Yeah, they are, because they all come from the 4 birth pangs, right? Yeah, and those are the identical ones that are described in the seals. Only now they're not just getting stronger; it's 25%. Yeah, and as the birth pangs get stronger in the trumpets, then they get to be 33%. If you don't do anything else, my advice for people is put everything around what Jesus said, because it defines everything as the word of God and the spirit of prophecy, as he's called in Revelation. And don't exclude inconvenient passages. Yes. It all has to fit. It can't contradict.
And don't skip the what are they called? The family trees of everybody. Don't skip those either. Those are very important. If you get through there, you'll show you a lot of crazy stuff in there. There's a lot of crazy things in there.
Everything in the Bible that's written is important.
Yes, and it's there to show you, and it's like, once you really get into it, the Holy Spirit had his hand in the whole thing, because it's 66,000 or 66 books written over thousands of years. The Old Testament is written through several thousand years, and the New Testament is written through one person's lifetime. So and they didn't hang out with each other. It's only the people in the end really did. The ones in the beginning, they didn't hang out with the people in the end because they didn't know each other. It's crazy how it all just lines up.
All right. So anything, Gary, you want to talk about as far as the end times that people could prepare for? Any advice for any of the Christian conspiracy gentlemen that are listening to the show, or females?
Yeah, I would say that, everybody needs to learn about prophecy. They do. And you also need to understand prehistory to understand prophecy and the history in the Bible. Just as what was just mentioned about understanding, the genealogies, that the allegory and the context for a lot of end time prophecy is rooted in prehistory. It starts with the angelic rebellion, and it continues into the creation of the giants and the beast empires. It all flows out of that. So you need to understand that to understand the full context of how horrible things are going to be. Yeah. And that everybody ought to pray not to be part of the last 7 years, because nobody should want to go through what we're going to go through. And so I would encourage that in terms about end time prophecy. I would also encourage people to segregate Israel and Judah as 2 separate entities with separate prophecies assigned to them, and do not confuse those prophecies to Judah and Israel, or some of the sons of Israel, as in Manasseh and Ephraim and Dan. Those are to be applied to them as well, particularly when you have the end time implication of that prophecy, and not to overlay any of that onto the church's prophecies, which we get out of the New Testament for the most part. And so otherwise you're going to get confused, and you're going to get contradictions. But the prophecy has markers. Not only do we get the chronology, it gives us markers all of the time in terms of the time frames, in terms of the trumpets. The trumpet blasts are part of Old Testament prophecies. When you see trumpet in Old Time prophecy, understand that's probably going to be part of the trumpet blast, right?
Yeah.
And you get the bowls of wrath being poured out in the Old Testament. You get the day of the Lord, you get the year of the Lord's favor. Those are all markers that will help you establish the chronology of the last 7 years and what happens before and what happens during. And then you won't get confused as to the tribulation being the wrath, because they're two different things.
Yeah, and for those that are listening that are just starting to read the Bible, and that are new to this, I mean, you got, try to do your best to just get a relationship with God and try to catch up, man, because what we're describing right now is not a walk in the park. Everything that Gary is going over, everything that's in Revelation, it's not a walk in the park, man. We got to definitely be ready. You want to know God. You don't want to be the one that Jesus says, you might have prophesied in my name, but I never knew you. You don't want to be going through the end times of the 7-year tribulation. You want to try to get raptured, which I believe the rapture. I didn't even get to ask you about that. Do you believe in the pre, the mid, or the end
Post.
Rapture, post rapture?
I pray for a pre.
Me too. I don't think we deserve it though.
But if I put all of the verses together and put it in a way that there is no contradictions, because that's why there can't be any contradictions, I find that it comes to sometime just after the midpoint of the last 7 years. Okay. And that includes, like, if you're going to include prophecies on rapture, all of the events and the timing can't contradict any of the other prophecies anywhere. And that also includes the sequence of the resurrections. You have to have an understanding of that as to when they happen, because you get at the rapture point, all of those who weren't martyred, all the ones who weren't first fruits, right, are going to be resurrected at that point in time. And let alone there's 2 other resurrections after that. You've got Ezekiel 37 with Israel, and after they accept Jesus and as their Messiah, and that's at the time of the second Exodus, which is in the second half, which is another big sort of end time story in itself. And that you have the resurrection of those in the last 3.5 years who refused the mark and are killed, right? So you've got different resurrections, but it's that first fruits one that really, you got to understand who the first fruits are. The first fruits are described in Revelation 6, are the ones who died for the testimony of Jesus. And those who are told to wait for those who are going to come out of the tribulation, for the tribulation of the saints, in Revelation 7, that will be martyred like them. And there would have been first fruits probably before, because we have a council of humans there before. So there's a series of resurrections that happen, and you have first fruits as classified in Revelation 14 that applies to the 144,000 who are not told who are killed, but they're seen in heaven. So the implication is, as first fruits, were slain for their testimony in the first 3.5 years. And so you can't have the other resurrection in the time of rapture until all the first fruits are taken, but not inclusive of the ones who take the mark or refuse the mark, as I would understand it. But I could also understand how you could make an argument towards that, but I don't think so, because of the other resurrections and the other passages. And people say, well, what Jesus said, let's say in Matthew 24, you get the great tribulation after the abomination. Correct. That's the great tribulation of the world. It's not the tribulation of the saints. And that's the time of the wrath bowls. And if you go back into Matthew in the early parts and after the birth pangs, and I think starting in about verse 9, people are going to be afflicted, and then they're going to be turned in, they're going to be persecuted, they're going to be killed. That's what is being talked about in Revelation 7. And here's the catcher. That word afflicted goes back to the Greek word Philippes, which is the word that is used for tribulation.
Okay. Wow.
So it's,
Okay.
so if the translators were a little bit more consistent, you would be saying tribulation there where you do two other times in Matthew 24, and it's the same word that's used in Mark. So you do have that tribulation of the saints that's separate from the tribulation of the whole world. That hasn't been seen since the beginning, two separate tribulations. And I have a great document on the two tribulations if people want to get hold of me on it. And if people are interested in my approach, if there's some curiosity that you find of interest there, I've got a 10-point sort of points that I apply to how I approach prophecy. So it's pretty simple. And if people want to have a look at that, and if that helps, just get a hold of me through my website, through the email, contact the author, and I'll send that to you.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, it's been about an hour. I want to know, Gary, what are you working on? What do you have coming up? You could tell our audience and how to get a hold of you and what you got going.
Well, I do not have any conferences booked at this point because things are still up in the air. Borders are just starting to open up, but we'll see how that sort of transpires and whether or not there's going to be conferences. I did get an email that to go to England to do one for next year, so I'll be responding about that. So I'm open if travel is available and I can actually get across the borders. I'm open to do that, but nothing booked. But I am in the meantime working on 2 books. One I've set aside, which is about the second Exodus, to get out a new book for early in the new year, which is the sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And, and the title for it that I've got in mind, we'll see what the publisher says, but it'll be entitled Prehistory and Prophecy, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And this is going to be essentially all biblically based so that people can understand that connection from prehistory to the meanings and examples in prophecy. But I will also walk through, because I found it absolutely astounding in the shows and the contact that I have with people that are getting a hold of me, is that they want more information about how giants and angels, where they show up, why it's important in the Bible. And they have no idea how much is talked about giants and prehistory and references to prehistory and the angelic rebellion and how that sort of plays out through prehistory, history, and into prophecy. And so that's what the book is going to do. It's going to weave more of the information, or as much as I can get out of my head, into a book on all about giants in the Old Testament, both before and after the flood, heavily after the flood, and how that connects to prophecy. And so I'm hoping to have that out next year. So, and it's going to walk through peoples that they have never even thought of in terms of being giants or hybrid giants.
That's what I like about you, Gary. You funnel all of your knowledge through the Bible, and I like that. You don't just take it and be like, oh, I found a mythical cool story and I'm going to go with it. No, you funnel it through the Bible, and I like how you're explaining, because I feel like we're in a time of the most Bible literate people that are, like you said, they have all these questions about where is it. But I talk to my friends, they go, what are you talking about? There's giants in the Bible. I go, yeah, they're pretty big. And I take a measure because I work with I take a big old measuring tape out. I show them how big Og, the king of Bashan's bed was. They're like, no way. And I'm like, yes, dude, this is, you gotta understand, cubits is a little bit bigger than a foot. And I'm explaining it to him. And if it's a royal cubit, he's gonna be in royalty. So he's gonna be a little bit bigger than everybody else. And he's like, so he was 19, dude, he could be as tall as who knows, but they're all through the Bible. It's in there. And people think it's like, well, why don't they speak about the Nephilim more? And I said, because they already knew about them. The Bible was written about them back then. They don't even talk about them much.
I mean, here's the thing. 2 things on that is the church does not teach prehistory and prophecy. So people are blind in that. And that's a fundamental failure of Christianity today. And they're not taught about that in seminary schools, and they're told to avoid it. So that's why it's not being passed down. Yeah. Now,
Seth and Cain is what they try to go with, so that it makes
which makes no sense, because the Bible gets
shred that
contradiction. So what people don't understand is Rephaim, which is the root word for giant most of the time in the Old Testament, is used 25 times.
Yeah.
And people don't know that. And Nephilim is only used 3 times.
Yeah.
Once in Genesis 6:4 and twice in Numbers 13:33, when as part of the embellished report. because they're talking about Anakim, who are giants, which is the word Rapha out of Deuteronomy 2, which is Rephaim. So the giants after the flood are talked about as Rephaim. But I mean, people don't know that Cherithim are Rephaim. People don't know that Perazim are Rephaim. They don't know, as I said, so many different nations, and they don't know why. And nobody ever asked. And it's stunning to me. Why don't 9 of the 12 people listed as part of the Canaanite tribes, Canaan, Sidon, and Heth, the 3 named, why are the other 9? Do they not have a patriarch? Because everybody else in the table of nations does for the 70 nations. And that's because the patriarch, and I'll cover that in detail in the book, are Rephaim names.
Nice.
Yeah. So they're not,
Good
they're not
point
human.
right there, Gary.
Yeah.
If I was next to you, I'd give you a big old hug right now. You're so BA. It's awesome. And that's me.
Gary, we really, really appreciate you. And like I said, man, we'll have you on again at some point. You're like the perfect guest. Maybe we could do like a Jesuit episode. I know you're really good with the Jesuits. That's how I was introduced to you off the Fourth Watch, like 4 years ago. I was like, and then I was like, I got to get Gary on the show. I'm so happy to have you on. And it's really a blessing to have you on. And I think we mesh well, you know, and I really love the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes,
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And hopefully we've raised a little bit of curiosity with the audience and maybe connected a few more dots. And hopefully that helps people in the pursuit, because we're all trying to learn more about this, and we're all trying to learn about it to be able to communicate it in a way that's going to wake up other people.
Yes, and that's it. All right, let's end this in prayer, guys. Father God, in the name of Jesus, thank you once again for providing us with a clear connection. I just want my audience, if you could help them to get more into the word, help them get more into prophecy, help them have a better relationship with you, Lord. We really appreciate you giving us this platform and giving us Gary to come on and, clearing his schedule to have him come on, Lord. Thank you so much. I pray for everybody out there that's going through any type of hardship. I pray that any of these rumors of wars, Lord, we pray for peace. We definitely don't need China, Australia, any of these countries fighting, because I know that our military will be next to take them on. So help us, Lord. We appreciate everything. Thank you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys. Thank you, Gary, and we will definitely have you on soon. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Get out of here, guys. Hey, thank you, Gary, again. Wonderful speaking to you. Josh, love you, brother. Love both of you guys.
Love you, brother.
Keep the word. Hey, where to go, man? I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll see you guys later.